Have you ever wondered why you triple check whether the front door is locked, just like your dad? Do you find yourself putting on a brave face in public, just like your mum? Are you the person that has this intense need to project perfection? Do you think you could have picked this up from your parents? And where did they get it from? Their parents, perhaps? This discreet passing on of traits and behaviors is called intergenerational transmission. And the likelihood of it increases when different generations of a family live together. As a psychologist, I've had the privilege of supporting many individuals through their emotional wounds. So I'm going to tell you a story about a young woman, just married and is about to start her new life in her husband's home. But it's not just the two of them living here. There are 3 generations in this home: her husband's parents, her husband's siblings, their partners, and their children. That's a lot to get your head around, right? Believe me, I know. That was me. But this is a norm in my culture. I was newlywed, mourning the loss of my old life, and in this new norm, I found myself going to some uncomfortable extremes, such as exhausting myself by cooking loads of different dishes, knowing that they won't be eaten, overcommitting at the expense of my job and career, all in bid to present as a well-rounded superwoman so I could please my new family. These behaviors, these gestures, these feelings, they weren't necessarily good for me. Nobody had asked me to do this. This was all internalized, and it came from me. So what was going on? My curiosity and observations into these behaviors peaked when I became pregnant with my first child. Having realized that I had inherited some beliefs from my elders, I became extremely fearful that I would pass on something to my baby. By this, I don't mean genetic risks like high cholesterol and diabetes, which does run in my family, but some of my own behaviors, my own residual thoughts, like my constant need to please those closest to me, which led me to running marathons at 7 months pregnant with my second child, when really I should have been resting, going out of my way, often at the cost of my own well-being. My fixation on significant events, like the death of my dad, the unprocessed grief weighing on me like a cape made out of lead. I realized that if I was going to disrupt these negative patterns, I was going to have to explore my own inheritance. Here, I found themes stretched across generations. The thing is, we all exist in family trees. These family trees have roots, leaves, and fruits. They are all interconnected, shaping who we are and how we grow. Our roots are our biological inheritance, the significant events that happened before us, shaping our minds, bodies, and where we find ourselves in the world. Our leaves are the burdens that are passed down through this inheritance. But leaves are not permanent. They can be shed, and we can leave them behind. Our fruits are the gifts that are passed to us. They nourish us. They make us strong. They give us flavor. We all carry this beautiful and complex ecosystem within us. So what did I find when I looked back? My intergenerational story started with a little girl. My nanny was 8 years old in 1947 when India and Pakistan were formed during partition. Even now, I can't say her story without the intergenerational shivers and the emotions that I feel. Families were forced to move from ancestral lands, leaving homes that they'd lived in for generations and fleeing in fear of their lives. My nanny carried the grief of what she witnessed at this time. The mistreatment of women, the spreading of illness, and a lot of death. At age 12, 4 years after partition, she was married off to a man she'd never met. At 16, she gave birth to her first child. At 19, she was a mother of 3. And then her siblings and parents all left her in India when they migrated to the UK, leaving her alone and isolated whilst she lived with her in-laws. Left to fend for herself and suppress the rejection she felt at her own family leaving, she had no choice but to carry on. Did she worry about what she would pass on to her children too? In the therapy room, I'd noticed what I'd inherited from my nanny. She carried a lot of grief, including the loss of her grandson here in the UK. I grew up being warned in Punjabi, "Jinnai tusi hasunge, onna hi rovunge." The more you laugh, the more you will cry. Somehow, the women in my family had been conditioned to be wary of too much joy, as if this was a survival mechanism. I saw this in my mum, who carried the burden of upholding family traditions, doing everything she could to avoid bringing shame to her family. It's probably why she upheld the role of silence and of service to others for so many years. But what stood out to me across these 3 generations was this burden of rejection. It was this burden that manifested into our shared need to put the needs and expectations of others before our own, often at a personal cost. I saw this in myself. Growing up, I often felt excluded, whether because I was off school for weeks at a time due to severe eczema, or I was just simply too much for my friends. But here's the interesting thing. Alongside these burdens, there are gifts. My nanny was a wonderful storyteller. I have been told that the children in her village in India would crowd around her as she told them tales and anecdotes. It's a gift I also inherited, where stories became my refuge. And the alternative and somewhat exaggerated realities I'd created for myself. She was also a staunch advocate speaking up about the atrocities committed against women in her community. She became a beacon of hope and inspiration to those around her. A woman of courage and determination, doing everything she could to set up a better future for her children, which meant sending them all abroad, knowing she may never see them again. My Nani lived a short life of 58 years, but she lived a full life, a woman of courage. I see this courage in my mum, who has always advocated for me, especially in my pursuit psychology as a career, defying anyone who questioned those pursuits, negotiating loans to get me through university. But most importantly, she modeled advocacy for herself. By challenging societal norms and patriarchy and shedding those burdens that she had. And now I see how it's passed down to me. I often gave psychology and my profession so much power. After learning this was in my lineage, and advocating for others, it's become my mission to advocate and raise awareness for multi-generational families, which is why I've opened my own or launched my own community social enterprise, Multi-Gen Zen, to offer psychological support to those living in such a way. Because this will become a national norm. Because of the cost of living crisis, more and more families will opt for this type of living. As I started to nourish the gifts passed on from my Nani and my mum, I began to relinquish that cloak made out of grief that came with the death of my dad 14 years ago, and started to reflect on what he'd passed down to me. For most of my life, I had seen him as a raging alcoholic. But earlier this year, I watched a documentary depicting him and my uncles and their fight against the far right in 1970s Southall, long before I was born. I had no idea, and nobody had ever told me, that as a young South Asian man, my dad was a part of these peaceful protests that had turned violent in the pursuit for justice. Gaining a deeper knowledge of my own family's history enabled me to understand where I come from and what I carry. My roots are my South Asian heritage and my immigrant family. The leaves or the burdens were my constant need to please and my feelings of rejection. And the gifts are the courage I find in my maternal lineage that are transmuted to my own children. Whether it is exploring your roots, shedding your leaves, or nourishing your fruits, cultivating curiosity around your own tree of life can be hugely transformative, especially among those who are living in multi-generational families, where the transmission of burdens and gifts is heightened. Identifying how they show up in your life and within your family system can enable you to break cycles and embrace some of the positive gifts you want to bring to your life. I encourage you all to go inwards or towards your own tree of life with openness, empathy, curiosity, and courage. You may be surprised by what may be in your roots, revealing the sweetest of fruits.